What is SNAP? SNAP is a statewide network of agency photos. We house the repository for the state of Michigan from the Department of Corrections, all arrest records submitted to us through a live scan machine. A live scan machine is the machine that people are fingerprinted on when they're booked into the jail, and all their demographic information is listed within that. In the Secretary of State photos, we have a complete copy. Up to 1998, anything before that is on digital screen. We only have 1998 to present. All but one county currently submits to us, and that county is in the Upper Peninsula. Our staff that do facial recognition are 3 people, 2 trained digital image examiners and 1 trained supervisor. We have an audio visual analysis section, and we work in conjunction with them. So if a crime occurs and say the business has CCTV footage, they would send it to the audio visual analysis team, and they would extract those images and send them to us, and we would run facial recognition on them. We study the effects of aging, weight loss, weight gain, cosmetic surgeries. We have the ability to do 3D post-correction, although we have decided, and the whole community of FR has decided that that is not a good use of imaging, so we don't use that anymore. We are trained in conducting morphological comparisons, which is also called a one-to-one comparison of 2 images. We are trained in testifying in court. All of our lead reports that I'm going to talk about in a couple minutes go through a peer review before they are sent out, and we do yearly proficiency testing. So what is facial recognition? The common misconception is that facial recognition is we run a photo through a database and we send the officer the first person that pops up. That's 100% false. That is not what we do. So facial recognition is just taking the image, putting it into our platform, and then it runs through the database. Then the gallery that is returned, those images are based on a mathematical equation of points of the face. In addition to that, once we get the gallery back, facial identification is what is used to actually go one-to-one from that image submitted to us from the police department with that gallery of images to determine if there are enough similarities within those images to find a viable candidate. One thing you will notice throughout my presentation is we will never say we are identifying someone or we are matching with someone. Those are not in our vocabulary at MSP. I know that some other departments use that. We do not. We only use viable candidate because further investigation is needed once that lead report is returned. The algorithm is what actually makes the template of the face. So everything is stripped from the person's face once it's entered into the computer, and it's just mathematical points at that point. So based on a couple studies, you need facial recognition in conjunction with facial identification in order to determine a viable candidate. You can't rely on one or the other. This is another example of how facial recognition works. So step 1 would be the photo, which we call the probe photo. That's inserted into the platform. Points are then put on the face from the algorithm, and then step 2, you can see where everything has been stripped from the person's face, and now it's just mathematical equations. So that stripped face of just dots and lines, that's what's ran through facial recognition. So how do we receive requests? Our requests come through a shared mailbox. And we have designated days between me and my cohort, and we go through one by one in the order in which they are received, and we do facial recognition on those images if they're suitable. So I'm going to go through that process now. Every has to have a valid case number and file class. We will only process requests if those are in the email or the request form that are provided to police departments. This is a very reactive technology. We are not doing anything live from security cameras. We're not at the local event going into the camera that they have there and automatically running facial recognition. We do not do that. Do not do that. This is all reactive. So a crime has had to already occur, and the police have to already be actively investigating. So if it comes in and it has the photos and says, hey, can you run this through facial recognition? We won't do that. We will reach back out to the requester and ask them for the required information of the case number and file class. We do not run images of suspicious persons. So, someone's walking down the street, the neighbor didn't really like that, so they called the police. Well, walking down the street isn't a crime, right? So we will not run those images. But we do run images of suspects, witnesses, and victims. We have preferred file types. Is anyone into photography here? Yeah, so a JPEG image, actually, every time you send a JPEG image through an email or you save it to your computer and then try to email it, what it does is it compresses the data within the image. And by the 5th time that you save and send that JPEG image, there's a lot of pixelation within that. So we like files in the most native format. PNG, BMP, and TIFF are usually the formats that we prefer, although we will accept JPEG images if they are suitable. Once we get the request, we just work through the requests as they come in unless they're marked urgent. If they are marked urgent in the subject line, we just treat it as a normal request. Again, we look for case number and file class. We won't process without it. Then we look at the image quality, and we ask ourselves a couple questions. Would the algorithm be able to make a template off this face? So is that image clear enough that it can make a template on that face? And would I be able to do a proper one-to-one comparison of those images if it returned a gallery? If the answer to both or just one is no, we don't run the image and we just tell the requester, hey, this is not suitable for us to run. Here's some images that we received. Can you see why we wouldn't be able to run facial recognition on those? I can't tell you anything about them, basically. I don't know. The algorithm would not be able to make a template of the face because it can't really see the eyes. They're so pixelated. You can kind of see a face in the image on the right there, but I can't tell a whole lot outside of that. So I would not be able to do a proper morphological comparison even if a gallery did return to me. So once we put the image into the system, the template is created by the algorithm. Then it runs that image through the almost 60 million images that we have in our database. It then returns a gallery. We have 3 algorithms at 50 each. So if we don't get 1 back, we get 50 or we get nothing. So it's all or nothing when it comes to that. And then we will go one by one through the 50 and see if we can find a viable candidate. If we can't, we can't. I could go into some pretty deep terminology here, but do the eyes have the same shape? Do they open the same? Do the white parts of the eyes, are they the same size, or do they show the same amount? Are the pupils, what do the pupils look like? What color is the iris? Are they similar? And then I work down to the nose, and there's a bunch of parts of your nose, and definitely once you've done morphological comparisons for a long time, you never look at anybody's face the same because instantly you can tell. That nose is completely different than the nose I'm looking at. The base of the nose is much wider or much slimmer. The thickness of the sides of the nose are different, and then I move on to the mouth. If we find enough similarities within the features, we can produce a viable candidate. If we don't, we move on to the next person. If we go through 150 people and we don't find anyone with enough similarities, we didn't find anyone. This is what a sample FR search looks like. This is a stock image that I have input into the system. So we place the image in. If I went up and hit search, template made, running through the gallery. And then the galleries would show up in those large areas, those large white areas that are currently white. So say we find a viable candidate. We produce what's called an investigative lead report. And I'm going to show an example of that here in a second. So those investigative lead reports go through what's called a peer review. That means that once an investigative lead report is determined, that goes on to either my cohort or the supervisor, or both. Typically, we just send it to both. If they agree, then the investigative lead report is then returned to the requester. If they don't agree, it does not. It stops there, and we say we didn't find anyone. So there has to be an agreement between all of us. So on the left here, we have a sample investigative lead report. This is what goes back to the requester. There's some bold, capitalized text and some in red at the top. That is there for a reason. That is letting the officer and agency know that who is being returned in this lead report is not a positive identification, and it's just a lead. So basically they need to treat it as an anonymous tip or a tip called in, because we will never say, yep, that's exactly the person. Then it has all the information associated with that person. If they don't come from our state, sometimes it's just an FBI number and a name. If we don't find anyone, we send a negative search report, and that's what's on the right, and it just basically says, hey, we didn't find a viable candidate, so sorry. So what can law enforcement do with our investigative lead report? They should treat it as a tip. Basically what it's done is officers used to go through a mug book. If they had a photo of their suspect, and they'd go through a mug book and they'd flip and they'd flip and they'd flip so they could use their own facial identification skills, which everyone has a little bit of, to see if they can find a viable candidate. So what facial recognition has essentially done is taken that from months and months of looking through photos by an officer to about 1 minute or less. So we've really cut down on the time it takes to be pointed in a certain direction. I want to highlight as many times as possible that it's not probable cause for arrest. So, I mean, that's exactly what it is. You can't arrest just off a lead. That investigative lead report needs to be investigated further with different tools by the police department. And then that investigative lead should be put within the police report as designated by that agency police policy. What can't law enforcement do? Well, since it's not probable cause for arrest, you can't run out and arrest based on the lead. It's not a positive form of identification, it's a lead. They can't get a search warrant based on the investigative lead, and they also should not conduct a photo lineup just based on the investigative lead. Other tools need to be utilized within the police department to figure out if they have enough to do a search warrant or they have enough to do a photographic lineup. We have a SNAP acceptable use policy. That policy can be found in multiple ways. You can do a basic Google search and it'll pop up. It's available on Michigan State Police website. If you work for law enforcement, it's available on the communities page. So we've made it available in multiple places. Anyone can go look at it. And then anyone who utilizes SNAP has to review that policy and tell us that they have reviewed, understand, and agree to follow that policy. Here's a couple successes. We do a lot of human trafficking victims. I can't even count how many I have done. But obviously, you know, we want to try to lead law enforcement in the right direction. So here's just a couple of successes we have done from Michigan. Obviously, because most of these are, we mostly serve Michigan, well, 90% or more. So here's a human trafficking. Couple of the features that you can see. Quick facial identification, you can see a lot of similarities. Here's another one. And another set of cases that we do a lot of are unknown decedents. So people in the morgue, their families haven't come to identify, they don't know who they are. Here's one of them that I worked on. And here's another one, they only had a cell phone picture and her body. So that's another one we were able to help with. And that's our information. If you have any questions, you can contact me. You can contact the General State Police SNAP mailbox. That is it. Does anybody have any questions? See on a monthly basis. Last month, we received around 400.
For 2 of you,
And a trained supervisor.
how are you able to go through and follow the process without trying to understand 2 of you?
Well, I do sometimes around 11 to 20 a day. So we work through them just in the order that they come in, and we do as many as we can in a day. And sometimes it takes, our turnaround is 24 hours, sometimes it's a week, it just kind of depends.
Other question. You mentioned that the algorithm creates the image. The algorithm that creates the image.
The algorithm, right?
The algorithm creates the image. Something like that.
The algorithm is what makes the template.
The template, yeah. So that's we have heard over and over again that the input into the algorithm determines what kind of output is out. And still being a problem with the input of that data, how are you making sure that the algorithm is equipped with all the raw data to make those probable images that you're getting out of the system?
So that would be a question for the developers of those algorithms and the platform that we use. I am not the one behind it, making sure the algorithms are doing it. So, because I'm just an examiner. So that would be a question for the developers.
Thank you for the work you do.
You're
I
welcome.
looked at this and thinking of just the very absolute importance. Now that said,
Thank you.
I thought about asking the developers that question.
So those are usually meetings that I'm not privy to. I just, like I said, I'm just doing the work. So I'm the worker bee. So those would be something that I wouldn't be in those meetings.
Can we ask your boss if you want to ask that?
I know that my boss and my boss's boss are in those meetings on a regular
They're
basis.
asking those questions.
Yes.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, no, there is someone within our department, my boss and my boss's boss, who are in those meetings discussing that. Anyone else? Awesome. Thank you for having me here today.
Thank you.